name's Todd. I'm the director for the Puyallup Research and Extension Center located right outside of Tacoma. Trained as an entomologist and work for WSU Extension. And what I'm going to kind of walk you through is a really specific problem, but also hopefully give you context on really the type of world we're living in now and some of the challenges that we're going to see, and also start advocating for how we prioritize what pests we think we need to throw some resources at to help mitigate. It's really important for audience members to know how pest status gets determined. It's often based on economic impact, and then that really focuses in on agriculture and sometimes natural resources. So cultural resources can sometimes fall through and really wind up in the land manager's laps to have to deal with. And this is one of those conditions where this pest came into the country, and now we're all just kind of learning how to live with it versus trying to keep this away. But I'm going to talk about this really interesting critter called the spotted winged drosophila. You're going to see a lot of the pests, especially in the insect world, that we talk about are native to the Pacific Rim. And let me get my laser pointer. Native to the Pacific Rim, and spotted winged drosophila is no exception to that. And that's really because a lot of our focused trade now in our region and in North America in general really has opened up the Pacific Rim, and we do a lot of international trade there. So we're getting a lot of hitchhikers. So this insect is native to Southeast Asia, Korea, and Japan. It's named spotted winged drosophila. It's just like that fruit fly that you studied in genetics class in high school or college or whatever. Same genus and kind of looks like the same thing. But the males have little spots on their wings, which is a little bit unusual. And that's hence the common name. It showed up, I always kind of try and put it in context of how fast this thing showed up and spread. So it first was detected in California fruit in 2008. And it took a couple rounds of someone really caring about it, because it's like, well, it's not unusual to get Drosophila showing up in fruit. They're fruit flies. They love rotten fruit, but something unusual was happening in California. So the field person was persistent and got it identified as this new introduced species. But by 2009, we found it in Oregon, Washington, Florida, British Columbia, in addition to that initial find in California. And by 2010, it's in a few more states, but pretty much by 2013, it was in every state and territory in North America. I think Vegas and Nevada didn't get state records quickly just because there's not a lot of green stuff there. So, but I'm sure that they were there around that time. Its pest status here in the Pacific Northwest, we estimate that there's about a 20% fruit loss. That's causing significant economic damage to just the small fruit industry, which this fly has really focused its attention on, and where we put a lot of our research. Fruit flies are, again, they love rotting fruit. And so where they found this fly specifically, they found it in overripe fruit of blueberries, blackberries, red raspberries, cherries, strawberries. We found it in plums, peaches, some grapes, figs, and hardy kiwi, and apples here in the Pacific Northwest. But it was only causing economic damage to blueberries, raspberries, cherries, and some of the peach varieties. So it was really causing more economic damage on those softer skin and fruit out there. And there's a reason why that this economic damage started happening, because this fly is a little bit unusual and different from the other fruit flies that we're used to. And this is why, you know, so here's the business end of a female adult fly that's a fruit fly that you normally get like around your ripe bananas around your home. Her ovipositor is pretty small and wimpy, and she'll lay eggs that are really well designed to float in rotting, mushy fruit. While Drosophila suzuki, which is spotted wing Drosophila, has this really unusual serrated ovipositor. It allows that female to go to underripe fruit and cut through that thicker, kind of tougher skin of underripe fruit and deposit a specialized egg that kind of sits there in that underripe fruit until it hatches and feeds. And this is important to understand and know about this pest is this insect really found a really cool niche that it could fill out in the environment. So what it does though is once it lays that egg, it goes into the fruit flesh and kind of causes it to get mushy. And then they swim around here and feed on that kind of mushy now starting to ripen and rot fruit, and that's what it likes to feed on. And we started really paying attention how it really specializes on this process of under-ripened fruit. While again, most fruit flies out there like the really overripe fruit and mushy stuff that we don't really want to eat anymore. So here's a great example of just in strawberries on how the susceptibility of that fruit increases as that fruit develops and starts to turn color. It's a fruit fly, so it can have a bunch of babies and kick over generations quite a lot. We've seen up to 5 generations here in the Pacific Northwest. That's kind of extreme ideal conditions, but the point is you can get good clouds of flies in agricultural settings where you don't have much management taking place. But they have very quick life cycles and kick over a generation pretty quickly. They also have this really cool phenomenon that they do is they get ready for winter and they produce something called a winter morph once the right environmental cues kind of kick in. And this is going to be important in understanding, you know, their impact on huckleberries. So what researchers discovered pretty early on is there's some environmental cues that these flies cue in on. And then as a result of that, they'll produce the next generation in these winter morphs that are kind of these beefier flies. They're bulkier and they're darker, so they can hold on to their heat a little bit better. So as this thing kind of settled into our agricultural settings, what we really did was focus growers in working on monitoring programs, focusing some of their management on non-crop alternative hosts that might be, you know, causing some populations to migrate in. You know, a lot of our IPM programs got thrown out the window with this pest, especially in small fruit. So growers spray a lot for this, whether you're organic or not. You're spraying a lot and you're trying to pick as often as possible. Once you get that fruit picked, try to cool it down so it slows down that egg hatch and egg development that might already be in the fruit, and start trying to manage your crop canopies to get more airflow in, and so you get better penetration of some of the pesticides that they use, and really focus in on sanitizing fields. So while all this was going on, I used to have this dreamy job down in Skamania County, and I hope everybody knows where that is. It's probably one of the most beautiful counties in the state. And I started getting these phone calls from Skamaniacs that were like, you know, I pick huckleberries my whole life, and this year I went out and every single berry I picked was wormy, and they were way up in the hillsides, and so I went out there in 2013 and started picking from a few different species of huckleberry. This is kind of near the Indian Haven Wilderness area on the edge around some campgrounds. And we surveyed along those areas where we both picked berries and we also trapped adults. What we found was pretty, surprising to us at the time. We found spotted wing Drosophila in a lot of locations at pretty high elevations. So we were getting positive infested fruit all the way up into 1,500 meters in elevation. And some of these places were tucked way, way, way back in the Forest Service and in pretty protected areas.
Todd, about 4 minutes left.
Okay, great. So we also found them in really high levels. So around Peterson Prairie, which is a campground, I think this one down here, it's right outside of Trout Lake. We were getting half the berries that we picked were infested with the spotted wing Drosophila. We also saw that, wow, this is kind of a snapshot on which ones they did better on, but we found pretty good infestation rates of the different types of berries that we were picking from. Also found pretty high populations in the adult traps, again, at those high levels. So that led us to kind of look at this a little bit closer. And Delila Rendon was a postdoc. I think she's somewhere in Italy right now working on spotted wing Drosophila, but she was a postdoc there at OSU and helped kind of look at this more as a phenology issue in the Mount Hood area of Oregon down there in the Columbia River area, and did the same thing where she looked at plant phenology and selective picking of those berries to see what she could find. And it was similar types of results where she was finding decent sized populations of spotted wing Drosophila later in the season, even up in those higher elevation areas. So she was finding kind of similar data. So what's the big deal? I mean, there's 11 species of Vaccinium and 10 species of rubus in our national forest, let alone all the other potential hosts that this thing can utilize. And when you really dive into the literature and try to understand this pest, it's doing exactly what it has evolved to do. This is a really interesting fruit fly in the sense that it's found its niche away from all the other fruit flies out there that want that soupy fruit. This fruit fly actually looks like it's evolved to exploit fruit as you move up in elevation and get to those ripening fruit and berries before the other fruit flies get a chance to infest those berries. So this fly might be doing exactly what it does in its native home range is as the season progresses, you start seeing pockets develop as you move up in elevation. So we actually have an attempt to try and get some more studies to look at this a little bit closer, because understanding how, when, and where this fly pops up in the huckleberries and higher elevations might allude to some ideas on how we might be able to give recommendations on managing it. I mean, we're not going to spray insecticides up in the fruit picking regions of Vaccinium ranges, but we might be able to start looking at cultural management options, like if it actually overwinters at those high elevations, which it might actually do. Maybe there's some cultural management practices such as selective burning that we can do in those huckleberry fields to help sanitize those fields of overwintering populations. We might be more prepared and watch that, if it doesn't overwinter up there, maybe it moves up in elevation as the season progresses. So it continually colonizes from low valley and jumps up on alternate hosts as you go through the season higher in elevations. Or we might actually be bringing in populations every year as fruit prickers go up into those fields. They might actually be bringing it with them on cherries that they brought down in lower lower elevations and might leave cherries around in the trash or whatever. So it could also be a combination of all three, but having a better understanding of this will help us give better recommendations to lower the impact that they're having up on those high elevation fields. And really, this is, I'm going to end it on this context is these changes, since we're living in a global environment where we're moving species all over the world as we interact globally as a human species, we're changing that environment, and that change is forever. And when you put it in context of this one location down in the Columbia River Gorge in the Indian Heaven fields, people have been picking there for over 10,000 years. And now there's a brand new pest that's never lived there ever since all that existence of time that is now there that we have to learn how to deal with. And this one specific story actually gained some momentum. I'm actually on the Washington State Invasive Species Council as a board member to really start looking at how we prioritize pests and help to add a function of understanding impacts on cultural resources in addition to those economic impacts that we see that we normally prioritize our new pest introductions around. So we hope to get more activity in understanding how these new pests showing up are impacting cultural resources in addition to those economic resources. And with that, I'll end it there, and I think we'll have time for questions when we open it back up as a group. Thanks.
Submitted to a diagnostic lab, and there's a rapid, if you will, ELISA that only takes a day or two to do. It's not like an animal side test, or the animal, the tissues are looked at under the microscope using a special stain to see the accumulation of prions. We really can't reliably diagnose the disease in live animals. We need the head of the animal after death to make the diagnosis for sure.
2 minutes.
Okay, so again, some final take-home messages. I would argue this is the most important disease in wildlife. It's a unique class of disease, being a prion disease, and these environments are contaminated for a long time once they become contaminated. We really need to be doing surveillance, particularly in areas where the disease hasn't been identified yet. If you ever have an animal that you think might have chronic wasting disease, the best thing is to take the head. There's a portion of the brain and retropharyngeal lymph node, it's called, that can be submitted for testing. Remember, don't shoot the animal in the head if it's a CWD suspect, because we want that brain tissue intact. The disease is not known to be transmitted to humans, but CDC recommends that these animals, if they're CWD suspects, not be consumed by humans. And if you'd like to know more, there's lots and lots of literature out there on CWD now, but Escobar has a nice review paper. So if you have additional questions about surveillance or about submitting samples, please let me know, and I'm always happy to talk more.